He was a husband, a father, a school teacher, known as quiet, dependable, kind. He paid his taxes, walked his dog, helped neighbors with groceries, never raised his voice, never broke a rule. And then something shifted, not all at once. It started with thoughts, strange ones, unwelcome. He began lingering too long when children passed by, felt urges he didn't understand, started secretly collecting disturbing images on his computer. And the man who once wouldn't kill a spider suddenly had impulses he couldn't explain. Let's talk about the real case of Charles Whitman, but not the part you think you know. In 1966, Whitman climbed a tower at the University of Texas in Austin and committed one of the first modern mass shootings in U.S. history. He killed his wife and mother before the attack, then opened fire from the tower. 17 people dead, dozens wounded. But before the massacre, he left a note, a letter that would become infamous among neurologists. In it, he wrote, "I don't really understand myself these days. I am supposed to be an average, reasonable, and intelligent young man. However, lately, I can't recall when it started, I have been a victim of many unusual and irrational thoughts." He begged that after his death an autopsy be performed, that someone examine his brain. And when they did, they found a tumor, a glioblastoma pressing against his amygdala, the part of the brain responsible for fear, impulse control, and emotional regulation. Let's talk about what this means. This wasn't a man with a long history of violence, or childhood trauma, or criminal tendencies. He was described as normal, even exemplary, until the biology of his brain turned against him. Let's talk about how we judge behavior. We're taught to believe people are responsible for their actions, that crime is a choice, that evil is moral failure. But what if the mind we punish was not the same mind that made the decision? Let's talk about neurological shift, because Charles Whitman's case isn't unique, not even close. There are hundreds, maybe thousands solved documented cases where a change in the brain led to a change in behavior. Brain tumors, frontal lobe injuries, degenerative diseases, even certain infections. And sometimes the first symptom isn't memory loss or confusion. It's crime, uncharacteristic, unexplainable, devastating. Let's pause. We like to think that personality is stable, that who you are is fixed. But the truth is darker. Who you are is biological, fragile, conditional, and if the wrong neuron fires, the person you've always been can disappear. Imagine this. A man is arrested for downloading child pornography. He swears he never had those urges before, that he's disgusted by his own actions, that something is wrong. Doctors don't believe him at first, but over time, his behavior becomes even more disturbing. He begins making advances toward children, gets removed from his home, and just as he's about to be sentenced, he collapses from a splitting headache. Scans reveal a frontal lobe tumor pressing directly on the regions of impulse control. It's removed, and something strange happens. The urges vanish. He returns to normal, remorseful, functional. But months later, the urges return. Doctors check again. The tumor is back. Let's talk about what this case means because it's real. It was documented in 2003 in the journal Archives of Neurology, and it poses a terrifying question. What if the crime wasn't caused by the person, but by their brain? Let's talk about the legal system. Courts assume intent, that people make conscious choices, that they know right from wrong. But what if your brain chemistry changes what you know? What if your frontal cortex, the very center of judgment, is compromised? Can we still say the person is guilty? Or are we punishing a malfunctioning machine? Let's talk about the insanity defense. It exists, but is rare, hard to prove, stigmatized, Most juries don't want to hear about tumors or misfiring neurons. They want accountability, justice, a face to blame. But the science says there are people who commit atrocities only after a specific neurological change. Before the tumor, no history. After removal, no recurrence. Only during the presence of the mass do the behaviors emerge. Let's talk about other cases. A teacher who developed obsessive sexual behavior toward minors only after a slow-growing tumor formed in his orbitofrontal cortex. After removal, his behavior returned to normal. Tumor recurred, and so did the impulses. Or the man who began stealing compulsively without need or history of theft. Turned out, he had frontotemporal dementia. His moral compass literally decayed. Or patients with Huntington's disease who become violent. Alzheimer's patients who sexually harass nurses. Brain trauma victims who lash out in ways their loved ones can't recognize. Let's pause. What these cases show is terrifying. A human mind can become alien to itself, not from trauma, not from abuse, but from a tiny physical change. And when that happens, who is responsible? The man? Or the tumor? The hands? Or the brain controlling them? And if a mind can become criminal through no fault of its own, how many others are out there undiagnosed, unaware, obeying thoughts they don't recognize as their own? When a person commits a crime, we look into their eyes. We search for remorse, for guilt, for a trace of the monster we believe lives there. But what if there's no monster? What if the face we're staring at belongs to someone who no longer understands what they've done? Or worse, what if they still look like the same person, but their mind is gone? Let's talk about identity in the brain. Everything you believe makes you you. Your memories, emotions, morals, fears, desires is rooted in neural activity, a delicate orchestra of chemicals, electricity, and tissue, a system more complex than any machine ever made. But when a single area is damaged, everything can change. Your kindness, your loyalty, your patience, your inhibition. Gone. Not gradually, sometimes overnight. Let's talk about free will. We want to believe we choose, that we are the authors of our thoughts, that our morals come from within. But neuroscientific research says otherwise. Studies using functional MRI have shown that decisions are initiated hundreds of milliseconds before you consciously make them. Libet's experiments, Soon's experiments, they all point to the same chilling conclusion. Your brain acts, and your mind explains it after the fact. So what happens when the brain acts in ways your mind can't justify? Let's talk about responsibility. In court, we punish intent. But neuroscience shows intent is fluid, situational, biologically sensitive. Does a man with a tumor deserve prison for impulses he didn't previously have? Does a woman with a degenerative brain disorder deserve shame for violence she never showed before? How do we punish someone who no longer exists? Let's talk about the future of criminal justice. As neuroscience advances, we'll be forced to confront questions we're not ready for. Should all violent criminals be scanned for brain abnormalities? Should treatment replace punishment? Can someone ever truly be cured of a crime that came from their biology? And most terrifying of all, how many evil people were just sick? Let's talk about society's fear. We fear losing control, losing identity, losing the belief that we are in charge of our actions. Because if the brain decides and the self follows, then what are we? Conscious passengers? Narrators of behavior we never fully chose? Let's pause. The man with the tumor, the teacher who changed overnight, the mass shooter who begged for his brain to be studied, these are not stories of excuses. They are warnings that beneath our laws, our morals, our social order, lies a biological truth we've tried to ignore. You are your brain. And when the brain breaks, so might the person. Let's close with this. One day, someone you love might change. Suddenly, without warning, They might lie, hurt, steal, disappear behind their eyes, and you'll wonder, where did they go? And the answer might be, nowhere. They're still here, but the machine that made them has rewritten the code, and no one, not even they, can bring the old self back.